What kind of wealth outlives the man who created it? What empire rises not from gold mines or oil fields, but from grief transformed into melody? At 83, Paul McCartney stands as the wealthiest recording artist in history, $1.2 billion earned not through inheritance or luck, but through songs written in the shadow of unspeakable loss. From a bombed-out Liverpool terrace to mansions across 3 continents, from a mother's death at 14 to a wife's passing that shattered him at 55, every fortune he's accumulated carries the weight of tears his family still sheds when they remember the price he paid. This isn't just a story of success. It's the anatomy of how one man turned every wound into wealth, every goodbye into a symphony, and built an empire that will make his descendants weep, not from sorrow, but from the staggering beauty of what he survived to create. The fortune forged in rubble, June 18, 1942. Liverpool lies in ruins, still bleeding from German bombs. In a cramped terrace house at 20 Forthland Road, Mary and Jim McCartney welcome their son Paul into a world of scarcity. There are no silver spoons here, no trust funds, no safety nets, only the stubborn dignity of a working-class family clinging to hope. Jim, a jazz pianist with calloused fingers and empty pockets, plays worn keys in the evening. Mary, a midwife-turned-nurse, works herself to exhaustion healing others. Their wealth, melody, harmony, the belief that music could feed souls even when cupboards ran bare. But in 1956, when Paul is just 14, that fragile world shatters. Mary develops breast cancer. Within weeks, she's gone. No warning, no farewell, just an empty chair at the dinner table, and a silence so heavy it threatens to crush the boy who remains. "What are we going to do without her money?" as Paul asked through tears. Not understanding yet that the greater loss wasn't financial, but the absence of her hands, her voice, her presence that had been his entire world. Jim McCartney, devastated but determined, made a choice. He turned to the only inheritance he could offer: music. He pushed an old guitar into Paul's trembling hands and taught him chords when words failed them both. That guitar became Paul's lifeline, his therapist, his escape from grief. Decades later, Paul would write "Let It Be," conjuring his mother's memory. "When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me." The Mother Mary wasn't biblical. She was the woman who died too young, leaving a 14-year-old to find salvation in 6 strings and a melody. The first brick. That humble house on Forthland Road, now preserved by the National Trust, isn't just a museum. It's proof that empires aren't born from privilege. They're built from survival. The crucible, Hamburg's brutal education. Fast forward to 1960. Paul is 17, riding in a van with 4 other Liverpool boys toward Hamburg, Germany. They're not headed to glory. They're fleeing toward desperation. The clubs of Hamburg's Reeperbahn district didn't want artists. They wanted performers who could survive. 8-hour sets, 7 nights a week, no breaks. Sleep in filthy storage rooms behind the stage. Eat scraps. Take pills to stay awake. Play until your fingers bleed, then play some more. This wasn't music school. It was a crucible designed to destroy them. But Paul endured. When his body screamed for rest, he played harder. When audiences threw bottles, he ducked and kept the rhythm. When promoters cheated them on pay, he memorized every lesson about business betrayal he'd need later. Then came April 1962. Stuart Sutcliffe, the Beatles' original bassist, Paul's friend, John's soulmate, collapsed from a brain hemorrhage, dead at 21. Another ghost to carry, another empty space where a voice used to be. Paul, reluctant and resentful, picked up the bass guitar Stuart left behind. "I didn't want it," he admitted. "It felt like being stuck at the back." But from that unwanted burden, he revolutionized rock music, treating the bass not as background noise, but as a singing, soaring voice of its own. The second brick. Hamburg taught him that genius isn't inherited. It's forged in exhaustion, carved from refusal to quit when every rational person would have gone home. Beatlemania, the gilded cage. By 1964, the world was screaming. Not just for the Beatles, for him. Paul McCartney, barely 22, standing before oceans of hysteria, his face on every magazine, his voice in every home. But inside the golden cage of fame, something darker festered. The pills from Hamburg never really stopped. The pressure to write another hit, another album, another tour never relented. When Bob Dylan introduced them to marijuana in a New York hotel room, it wasn't rebellion. It was self-medication for souls being devoured by their own success. Paul drew lines others didn't. He watched Brian Jones destroy himself, watched others spiral into heroin. He stayed back from the worst edges, but arrests followed him. Sweden, Scotland, Japan, where in January 1980, at 38, he spent 9 humiliating days in a Tokyo jail cell for possession, his tour canceled, his reputation shredded across front pages worldwide. "I wasn't trying to be a criminal," he'd reflect years later. "I just got caught in a world I didn't know how to manage." The hidden cost. For every million earned, there was a moment of freedom lost. For every ovation, a piece of normalcy sacrificed. The fortune was growing, but so was the cage. The collapse, when Beatles became ghosts. September 1969. John Lennon, his brother in harmony, whispers the words Paul never thought he'd hear. "I'm leaving the band." The world wouldn't know until April 10th, 1970, when Paul confirmed what felt like death itself. The Beatles were finished. For millions, it was the end of an era. For Paul at 27, it was the loss of family, identity, purpose. The Beatles hadn't been just a band. They'd been his salvation from the grief of losing his mother, his structure in a chaotic world, his reason for existing. He retreated to his Scottish farm, High Park, and descended into depression so deep that for months he barely played guitar. He drank to numb the pain, wandered fields aimlessly, questioned whether music had any meaning without John beside him. His first solo album, McCartney, 1970, was recorded alone in his home studio. Every instrument played by himself, every note a whisper to the void. Can I survive without them? Critics savaged it. The public doubted him. Even he wasn't sure. Then came Wings, formed with his wife Linda and guitarist Denny Laine. More lineup changes, more criticism, more comparisons to a past he could never escape. Every song measured against the impossible myth of Lennon-McCartney. Every lyric a duel with memory. Financial pressure mounted. Without the Beatles' income, he bankrolled everything himself. Tours that sometimes lost money, albums that flopped. The constant weight of proving he was more than John's sidekick. Then, 1977, Mull of Kintyre, a simple ballad about the Scottish cliffs where he'd hidden from his breakdown. It became Britain's best-selling single of all time, bigger than any Beatles record. Over 2 million copies sold in the UK alone. The revenues, combined with Wings' relentless touring, rebuilt his fortune from near collapse. The third brick. Redemption tastes like tears. The comeback album wasn't written in joy. It was clawed from despair. Linda. The love that held him together amid the chaos, one constant. Linda McCartney. They met in 1967 at the height of Beatlemania, when Paul was drowning in adoration that felt hollow. In Linda, a photographer, a mother, a woman who saw past the legend to the frightened man beneath, he found something fame could never provide: peace. They married March 12, 1969, just a year before the Beatles imploded. When the world fell apart, Linda held him together. She learned keyboards and joined Wings, enduring savage criticism from music snobs who said she didn't belong. Paul never wavered. Her presence was his defiance, his declaration that love mattered more than talent, loyalty more than acclaim. Together they raised 4 children: Mary, Stella, James, and Heather, Linda's daughter from a previous marriage, whom Paul embraced as his own. Their homes weren't showcases but sanctuaries. Muddy boots by the door, laughter at the dinner table, family before legacy. For 29 years, Linda was his anchor. Then came 1995, breast cancer. the same disease that killed his mother when he was 14. At 53, Paul was thrown into a nightmarish echo of childhood trauma, watching helplessly as history repeated its cruelty. April 17, 1998. Linda died at 56. Paul, at 55, lost the only person who'd truly known him beyond the songs. "You never get over losing someone like that," he'd confess. "You just learn to live alongside the emptiness." Every room became haunted. Every silence screamed. The fortune felt meaningless when the person who made it worthwhile was gone. The deepest wound. All the wealth in the world couldn't buy another day with her. The empire felt hollow without her footsteps in it. The second heartbreak. Heather Mills. By 1999, Paul was 57, still grieving, still lost. Then Heather Mills appeared, an activist, a former model, someone whose energy felt like life returning. "It felt like a door opening when I thought all the doors were closed," and he remembered. They married in 2002. Their daughter Beatrice was born in 2003. For a brief moment, Paul allowed himself to hope that joy could be rebuilt. But this time, love didn't unfold in privacy. It unfolded under tabloid glare, every argument dissected, every glance scrutinized. The intimacy he craved became spectacle. Trust turned to suspicion. Companionship calcified into courtroom battles. The divorce in 2008 was brutal. £24.3 million settlement, lawyers trading barbs, cameras capturing every grimace. Paul, at 66, stood not in a sanctuary, but in a circus. His heartbreak served up as entertainment. Unlike Linda's death, he admitted, this was chaos. Loud, messy, exhausting. One loss had left him in sacred silence. The other stripped him under floodlights. The lesson: even a billion-dollar catalog can't protect the heart from shattering twice. Nancy Shevell. Peace at last. Then came Nancy Shevell, not lightning or thunder, but a steady season. A businesswoman who'd fought her own battles, who carried her own understanding of endurance. They married quietly in 2011, when Paul was 69. No media frenzy, no spectacle, just two people choosing each other in the simplest, most profound way possible. With Nancy, Paul found what he'd chased for decades: balance, shared breakfasts, evening walks, laughter unforced by performance, the silence that heals instead of haunts. She's a pillar of strength, he'd say, less a compliment than a confession that she'd helped him reclaim the peace he'd lost as a boy. The empire today, $1.2 billion and counting. At 83 in 2025, Paul McCartney's fortune sprawls across continents. Real estate, Cavendish Avenue. London, the fortress where Let It Be and Hey Jude were born. Hyde Park Farm, Scotland. The refuge where he survived his darkest depression. Blossom Wood Farm, Sussex, home to the pine tree planted in memory of George Harrison. I sometimes talk to it as if talking to George. The Hamptons estate, preserved exactly as Linda left it, a living memorial Beverly Hills mansion. The shelter where grief was transformed into songs. The collection, Rolls-Royce Phantoms that carried Beatles through screaming crowds. Aston Martin DB5, gleaming like the 1960s themselves. Jaguars and Bentleys, each a milestone, not a trophy. His Hofner bass, the instrument that sang Yesterday, and Hey Jude guitars worn by decades of fingerprints, each string vibrating with history. The catalog. The Beatles' music catalog alone generates estimated tens of millions annually. Publishing rights, master recordings, royalties that flow endlessly like a river that never runs dry. Songs written 60 years ago, still earning while he sleeps. Philanthropy. Over $100 million donated across his lifetime to environmental causes, animal rights, humanitarian relief, music education. For Paul, wealth was never just about keeping, it was about giving. The reckoning, what the fortune really means. In August 2025, Paul released his latest studio album. At 83, he's still creating, still touring, His Got Back tour crossed continents in 2024, still proving that purpose has no retirement date. But here's what makes his family cry. It's not the mansions, not the billions, not even the immortality of the songs. It's the price he paid for every brick in that empire. The mother who died when he was 14, leaving him to find salvation in a guitar. The friend Stuart who collapsed at 21, forcing Paul to pick up a bass he never wanted. The Beatles who imploded when he was 27, leaving him questioning his own identity. The wife Linda who died at 56, leaving emptiness no applause could fill. The public divorce from Heather that stripped him under floodlights at 66. The decades of pressure, arrests, depression, grief, all transformed into melodies that now outlive him. When Paul's children, Mary, Stella, James, Beatrice, look at their father's empire, they don't see dollar signs. They see wounds turned into wealth. They see a man who could have broken 1,000 times, but instead wrote songs that helped millions through their own breaking. They see a legacy measured not in what he accumulated, but in what he survived to create. The final note. Paul McCartney's fortune will be divided among his children and the causes he championed. But his true wealth isn't in bank accounts or real estate, it's in this. A boy who lost his mother at 14 and found salvation in music. A young man who survived Hamburg's brutal crucible when others fled. A legend who endured the Beatles' collapse and rebuilt himself from ruins. A widower who learned to love again after unimaginable loss. An artist who transformed every wound into a song that helps strangers feel less alone. At 83, Paul McCartney stands as living proof that the greatest fortunes aren't inherited. They're earned through resilience. That the deepest wealth isn't held, it's given. That the most enduring legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you transform while you're here. If Hey Jude ever carried you through darkness, if Let It Be ever brought you peace, if Blackbird ever reminded you to keep flying, you've already inherited Paul McCartney's greatest fortune. Not his billions, not his mansions, but his message. That even when everything breaks, the music goes on.